Hi, thank you for joining me as I share lessons from Matthew 7 and Matthew 15 and Mark 7. Now, Jesus was teaching about purity, and his teaching on purity really exposed the Pharisees and their man-made laws and prescriptions about purity, talking about wash your hands before you eat, etc. Their traditions violated the direct commandment of God in verse 3, and their hypocrisy was just exposed by the traditions, really. What was clear was that righteousness comes through a relationship with God, not by acting right, saying what was right, doing the right things, or doing religious acts, right, or good deeds. It's possible to act right and not be righteous. We can see that clearly demonstrated by the people the Pharisees were. They were demonstrating that. They claimed righteousness, but they actually weren't righteous. The heart is the origin of the thoughts, and out of it comes what we truly believe in. And that is the seat of our emotions and our wills. And Jesus was trying to point out that that is where your true intentions actually come from, right? It's not really about what you say or what you do. Mark 7 verse 19 makes it clear that the Old Testament foods, remember there were some foods in the Old Testament that were like, don't eat, but Mark made it very clear from there that Jesus okayed those foods to eat. He says it's not what goes into your belly that defiles you, but what comes out of you. That's what flows out from your heart. Jesus and his disciples went into Gentile territory, right? And then going into this Gentile territory to me was significant. We know, at least from what my theories from before, well, I know that in Gentile territory, for example, he doesn't have to be careful. He didn't have to watch, heal and tell them not to say anything, because these were people who weren't necessarily trapped by the Pharisees and their man-made laws because they weren't Jewish. And then also, they weren't going to be looking to make him king like some of the Jewish people did, because they thought, oh, if this is the Messiah, let's make him the Messiah. But more importantly than that, or the most important or significant thing about the Gentiles was that they weren't even expecting a Messiah. So to them, he was just, maybe a prophet or a man that had power, right? But they didn't know that they needed a Messiah, right? Even though they were not expecting one, they didn't know they needed one. And Jesus went out and looked for them. So he sought them out because he knew that they needed him, even though they at the time didn't know. Now let's talk about the Syrophoenician woman. Now I feel like she knew him to an extent just because of the way she approached him. So perhaps she had heard about him, or maybe followed him around for a bit. But when he speaks to her, right, I believe that he seemed to have been testing her faith with his initial responses to her. And then she ended up passing the test, because as he was asking the questions, she didn't get put off. She didn't get, flustered by it. She was very adamant about receiving healing for her daughter. Now, what noting is that when Jesus calls her a dog, he doesn't call her that in a derogatory manner. Apparently, the Hebrew translation for that word dog there was the word that was used to describe household pets, or or a lap dog, and those kind of dogs were treated with affection and gentleness, right, and cared for, which is why I believe she said, or even they stay under the table to eat the crumbs from the children, because if it was just like a regular old mangy dog, nobody had them in the house, right? So I'm inclined to believe that Jesus was, not insulting her. And also, just because of the way things played out, I'm actually inclined to believe that, like the demoniac in Gennesaret, Jesus made that 70-mile journey to Gentile territory because of that woman, because of that woman's child, to heal them. Because after testing her, praising her faith, and healing her demon-possessed daughter by proxy, he turns around and goes home. So let me tell you what my lesson is, what my lesson was. The people he healed and fed, who were most likely Gentiles, the people he healed in this territory were most likely Gentiles, and this goes to show his concern for them. So even though remember that a few days ago when we read that he sent out his disciples, he sent them out to only Jewish towns. But this shows that he had concern for the Gentiles too, even though their time was coming, but he wasn't going to leave them until that time. He always has more than enough of what we need, as evidenced by his repeating the miracle of feeding a multitude. This time he fed 4,000 men, women, and children, or men excluding women and children. And this time there were 7 baskets left over. I'm like, 7. The first time it was 12, perhaps for the disciples. And I remembered that 7 is the number of perfection or completion. So chew on that. Thank you for joining me today. It really gives me great pleasure to share my lessons with you, and I hope that I'll see you here tomorrow again. Have a wonderful day. God bless you. Bye.